those of faith out there will say, duh, of course it works. Where have you been, Art? So, Lynn, is there a measurable difference between people who pray in the name of God or Jesus for a person's health and well-being versus those who use raw intent?
No, to be honest. And
thought.
this is not to denigrate religion or to try to say that one works better than the other, or to say that there is no such thing as religion. But certainly from a scientific point of view, the studies show that any kind of intention can work just as well as another. And many times what intenders of all sorts say, and they all said some common things, one aspect of it was a kind of a sense of surrender. I always thought that intention was this kind of real effort, that this real focused thought, like, when I'm watching my girls play in a sports competition or something like that. I'm sitting there and I'm a real noisy mom, and I'm going, I'm right in there catching the ball with them.
Sure.
But they all describe something very different. They describe a kind of a surrender. You put your intention out there, and then you surrender to a greater force. Now, that greater force could be the field. It could be Jesus. It could be whatever you think. It could be one of a number of beliefs. But the point is, there is, whatever you want to call it, it's a greater sort of energy force. And so that's why I'm saying it's more or less the same. But certainly the studies of Qigong masters, of Buddhist monks, of prayer, of certain prayer, all seem to have a similar effect.
Okay. So it's a real power. I don't doubt that for a second. But and it may turn out to be a power given to us by a creator. There's no way to say that is not true. But in measurements, raw intent is as powerful as prayer in the name of Jesus or God.
Well, remember, too, there have been a lot of prayer studies that have shown that, prayer doesn't work. I mean, these studies have been, I mentioned earlier on in the program, there's some real big problems with this. There was a great big study called STEP done by Herbert Benson from Harvard. And these were in this study, they had a group of heart patients, and they had prayer, their prayers were from 3 different kinds of groups. I think it was the Unity Church, a few other types. And they were only given the name and the last initial of the person to be prayed for. And so many people who say, who believe in prayer say, and use prayer, say, well, this isn't the way prayer is used in real life. It would be impossible for their groups to establish any kind of meaningful connection or even to zero in on the people they're praying for. And it's a bit like trying to make a cell phone call to somebody and expecting them to try to answer when you've only dialed the first 3 digits of the phone number. So, you're not hooking into the person. And they were, they showed that that a lot of the none of those studies used any kind of criteria to pick the people who in the prayer groups, or to keep track of how long they even prayed. How long is a prayer? How do you study it? So one of the big problems in looking at science, the science of prayer, is it's very difficult to try to control that in a scientific way. I think the better studies are just the plain ecumenical healing studies, where you're able to look at it in a certain way and quantify it scientifically. But one thing they did find in one study of healers is that it worked better if the recipient knew the healer. It also worked better if both of them believed something similar. They had similar beliefs. And thirdly, it worked, and this is the thing I found most interesting, is it worked best when the healer was in good health. It worked when the healer was in a good mood, when the healer was feeling well in every way. So in a sense, you heal the healer first, and then it works the best.
Isn't that interesting? All right, there's another thing about the quantum world. It really doesn't it doesn't respect time necessarily. So in the book, you, I guess, offer some evidence that people can pray for yesterday. In other words, go back and change the past. Is there actually evidence for this?
This was the most mind-boggling part of the research, Art. I was amazed by this one study. It was a prayer study, and it was done in Israel with a bunch of patients who have had blood infection, sepsis, and they were carefully divided into two groups, and these were all patients in the hospital. And one group was prayed for to see if they could get better more quickly, and the other half wasn't. And the people who were prayed for were better in every way. They got better quicker than the other ones. And the only catch of it was the people who were prayed for had been in the hospital in the early 90s, and when the prayers were carried out in the year 2000. And now the guy who did this actually wanted to prove that alternative medicine doesn't work. He was a skeptic.
Oh, no kidding.
No, this was supposed to show this stuff doesn't work. And I think he meant to say you can't use the scientific model to look at this. But he published it in the Lancet, and it got pounced on by skeptics and believers alike to show that, you can, that A, prayer studies work, and B, you can go back and change the past. So this became a real argument. But, I started looking at this because this is where I have a big bunch of trouble. How can you go back and change the past? And there have been enormous numbers of studies trying to do just this thing, where they've tried to change the activity in a shopping mall. The way people walk in a shopping mall, whether or not you could influence that retroactively. This is called retroactive intention. There have been some really interesting studies. We talked about REG machines. There were some great studies done by a guy called Helmut Schmidt, where he, instead of putting the REGs on a computer screen, he had them as a series of left and right clicks. So they were an audio kind of equipment. And he would tape it already, so he would have the output already. Then he'd have somebody listen to it 4 to 6 days later and attempt to change it. And now remember, the thing had already been run. But when he went and he put a master in a vault, so he'd have that master, he'd go back and listen to it and hear that if he had asked the person to do more left ear clicks than right ear clicks, he'd find that it had been changed in that direction.
God. Oh, that's incredible.
So you think, well, what was going on here? And what was going on was not that he changed the past. What was going on was that the mind reached back, in a sense, down the timeline and affected it at the point when it was generated. So in other words, we don't change the past.
Well, but that is affecting the past, though.
Goes back and fixes the present, changes the present.
Changes the present.
Yeah. That's what a lot of people are talking about. A lot of scientists have now evidence to show, in a sense, our past and our present are shaking hands with each other all the time. The future is constantly affecting, future conditions are constantly affecting the present.
This is such exciting research, Lynn. Where do we go from here with it? Where does the research go?
Well, this is what happened to me, as I say. I kind of came up against a brick wall at a certain point of my research. The thing that I was really interested in was what happens when lots of minds think the same thing at the same time. Where's the evidence for that? How much, does it get stronger? Does intention get stronger if you've got more than one person thinking the same thing at the same time? And there was some tantalizing evidence about this, but not really, not enough, And so my husband kind of turned to me and said, well, why don't you do these experiments yourself? And, I had to laugh at this because, I'm not a scientist. I'm a science writer, but the last experiments I carried out was in my 10th grade science class, dissecting frogs. So I thought, well, I can't do this. But then I started to think, well, wait a second. I've got hundreds of thousands of readers. I've got an experimental body here that's bigger than anybody, any other lab. Suppose I talk to some of the scientists I know and see if we can set up a global laboratory. And that's exactly what we're doing. So in a sense, the book is really just a prelude to what we want to find out about intention. So in other words, we're setting up labs in Germany, in University of Arizona, with the Institute of Noetic Sciences. And we're going to have periodic studies of intention where all the readers have to send their intentions all at the same time. To some sort of measurable target. So this will start telling us more and more and more about it. Because
what are you going to try to do?
Pardon me?
What are you going to try to do? You're going to get many minds to focus, right?
Yeah, we're going to tell them to, let's say our first target is going to be, we're creating a little mini Gaia, like a little mini world. And we want to artificially raise the temperature. And we're going to ask all of our readers at that point, and I think I think we've got our first one targeted for March 24th. We're going to have people all send their intention at the same time, a very specific intention that I'm going to have on our website that basically says, we're going to try to lower this temperature by a certain number of degrees. And we'll see. We're going to have the scientists on board. We'll have our webcam, and we're going to see, whether or not we can do that. We've got a lot of plans for a number of, they're all philanthropic targets. We're not trying to win the lottery here. We're not trying to make anybody $1 million or whatever. We're just trying to see, what can we do with our thoughts? Can they be a big force for good?
Yes, they can. They can be a big force. I'm not sure that's the part that got me. We created rain, Lynn. You know about my experiments, right?
Oh, I do.
What worries me is, will it always be as you intend? In other words, if I enjoin millions of people to try and create rain over a specific area that's been in drought, and there's no rain in the forecast, and it happens. For example, in Texas, Lynn, we created rain in an area that had been just drought-ridden, and they got so damn much rain, it flooded. It was awful. Now,
yes.
That's when I began to think, hey, I don't know what I'm doing. I really don't understand the dynamics of what I'm doing. And so how do we get a grasp on this so it can be used safely?
Well, this is why we want to keep it in very strict laboratory conditions. This is why we're just trying it as an experiment first, because we don't understand. We have to learn more. And so what I felt I could do was just harness this as an experiment first and begin to learn. And we find it, if we keep it in one little safe laboratory place, then we can learn. First, we'll start with non-human targets, because again, as you say, we don't know. We'll find out, do we have a positive effect? Do we have a negative effect on this little mini Gaia? We have other plans. If we do go on to humans, we might just try something like attention deficit. That's a big problem. Mm-hmm. And you can easily measure somebody's attention or lack of attention. So we might take one child and try to send an intention to see if we can just increase her attention for that time. But we'll be very careful about it. We may not go on to human targets right away. We've been thinking about trying to do, we could even track this on a computer screen if we have a patient with Alzheimer's. Let's say we just try to get that patient who's in a hospital, just to help that patient who may be very confused, to just go back to his room. We could track it right on the computer screen to see whether or not we're doing it. But we'd be very careful and selective about our targets so that we can't harm anything or anybody. And we just learn, because this is what needs to be done. We need to push the boat out here and really learn about it. We can't. This is where science always goes. You need to ask an outrageous question like, what if our thoughts could change the world? And find out what happens. And that's the point. That's what science has always done. It's always pushed forward by asking a ridiculous question, like, can you what if stones fall from the sky? Or can you take a giant cylinder of steel and let it fly through the air?
All right, well, here's one for you. When I do this program, Coast to Coast AM, I always open up by reading sort of a summary of the world news. The world news, Lynn, is never good. If you take a 5-minute summary of UPI or AP or any of the major news services, it's absolutely concentrating on the negative. People dead under a collapsed building. How many American soldiers have been killed in Iraq? I could go on and on and on, but that's the news. Now, I wonder if we can both agree that if what we're talking about with regard to intent is true, the constant battering that the American people get of bad news has got to have an effect on the world.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree. I oftentimes say, do not read the news, because it's just it becomes your life's intention.
Yes.
The thoughts that we are kicking around all the time, that little stream of consciousness we have all the time becomes our life's intention.
Here.
I believe the thoughts that are going on in your mind, I wondered about this once, about, just unintended thoughts. I had a cleaner. I re-renovated my house, and I had a cleaner who accidentally put too much lime scale remover on and stripped off all of the chrome on all of the taps in my house, and I had just renovated it. I freaked out so much. I had to go to bed. I was so upset about this. And I found out later that the point that I'd sort of vented my fury, she'd fallen off the bus and broken her leg.
Oh, my God.
And, you have to wonder, does that unintended thought of mine, did that have any effect on her? And I had a similar thing with my bank manager, who, when a computer program, because everything's by computer, didn't pick up a deposit and so bounced some of my checks. I was so furious about this. And I found out my bank manager the next day fell down and broke all of her front teeth. And I thought, was that me? Did I do that? And, of course, this is what I want to learn and find out. Do these unintended thoughts we have streaming through our minds, do they become our life's intention? Do they affect other people? I think they do.
That's an awfully important question, Lynn. All right, hold tight. We're at a break point. But, folks, it's true. Read any 5-minute summary of world news. Now, that's laying a groundwork for millions of minds to imagine that everything's falling apart, perhaps causing it to. I'm Art Bell. Indeed, from the high desert. Stephen in Bakersfield, California, fast blast me. Art, good news is boring. Bad news sells. Therefore, that's all we see. Good news is out there. It's just not interesting. Simple as that. Well, true. Absolutely true. And, but you know what? I'm beginning to get to the point in my life where I'm willing to entertain all kinds of notions that I previously would not entertain. For example, and I'll even go this far, as you know, I'm watching the climate very closely. I'm a big believer in global warming. I read you all kinds of stories about the latest studies and the temperatures rising and the North Pole melting and all the rest of this horrible stuff that's going on. How am I to know, honestly, that the news that I'm giving you is not causing a sort of reaction in millions of minds out there that's causing the problem to worsen? How am I to know that when I read you stories about more Americans than ever dying in Iraq, that doesn't cause more Americans to die in Iraq? It's a rough thought to have, but I'm willing to entertain it because all of what Lynn Taggart is talking about, all of this intention stuff appears to be absolutely true. So then you have to begin to entertain some of these notions about the way we're conducting ourselves in the world. We'll be right back. Or, for example, Lynn, all of these really good police shows like CSI and all the rest of them, they tend to concentrate on plots and stories about serial killers with weird sexual proclivities that chop women up into little pieces and all kinds of horrible things that actually are fairly rare. But how do we know? How do we know? In fact, we might even suspect that putting this into the minds of so many millions of people actually is a causative thing. You see where I'm going, right?
I think you're right. I mean, this is what I was looking at all the time with the material that I've been looking at with the intention experiment. It seems that, as I say, that flitting, that material that flits through our minds, the flotsam and jetsam of our daily lives, seems to have an impact all the time. Every thought, if you think every thought is a thing that's affecting other things, that we are sending and receiving all the time, the information we're receiving is affecting our bodies. Our thoughts are affecting our bodies all the time. And that this is we're taking this in. I mean, one thing that I was fascinated about, talking about bodies, is the idea that that the brain can't distinguish between a thought and a physical action. One thing I looked at that was very interesting about intention, I wanted to see how intention worked in real life, and I started looking at sports people because that's where they use mental rehearsal all the time. They use thoughts all the time. The greatest proponent of this was Muhammad Ali. When you actually study him, you see this guy was a master of intention. He used every possible intention, including the greatest line of all time, I am the greatest. You know, that's the best intention you can use. When you look at his little rhyming quatrains, they were all little intentions in disguise. You know, Archie Moore's going to hit the floor on 4. You know, and he actually would do that. He would set that intention, and it would come to pass. Anyway, my point is, I started studying what these sports people do. And as I say, they all engage in mental rehearsal because they realize the brain can't distinguish between a thought and a physical action. Perfect example of that is study of people. They divided people into 2 groups, and one group went out and worked in the gym, and the other group just thought about their biceps getting bigger. And they found that the people who worked out in the gym had an increase in their measurements of their arms by 30%. And the guys who just thought about it, it was an increase of 15%. So it was half as good. So for any of the couch potatoes out there, all you have to do is think yourself into the burn. You don't have to actually do it.
This is also incredible. So, again, when you look at our news, whether it's the ABC, CBS, NBC nightly news, or me reading a world summary, if the conclusion at the end of that newscast is, boy, the world is really going to hell in a handbasket, if that's what you believe to be true, and you spend some time thinking about that, aren't you helping it along?
Well, yeah, I think you are. I think with everybody who thinks and notices, I think with every time the mind notices, it is sending an intention. With what we understand now about the science, about the fact that things out there are affected by us at every moment. We're sending and receiving all the time. That what we are thinking, we're sending. What we're sending, we're contributing to. So, and we're also, as I say, we're taking this into our bodies. This has become something that's affecting that dynamism that is our organism, that is changing all the time. And if your thoughts are, if your thoughts are negative all the time, it becomes your life's intention.
Okay.
And
how can we experimentally, Lynn, determine whether one person's concentrated intention is as strong as a million concentrated intentions?
Well, as I say, that's the point of our study with the intention experiment, is just to really test this in a laboratory condition with our readers. And what I'm going to test it very carefully by, I'm making sure that people have to go through certain procedures on our website. Incidentally, Art, I just wanted to mention we've got your link to my website is Living the Field, our other website. We've also got one which is theintentionexperiment.com, which has the whole thing there. And we're going to have, as I say, webcam. We're going to let people send their intentions at certain points. We're going to give them certain tests, little psychological tests, so we know who's doing it. And we're going to test what's stronger. Is it just 10,000 people? Is 10,000 people stronger than 5,000 people? What about when it's 100,000 people? Is that stronger still? There were some interesting, we carried out one intention experiment that I recount in my book, where we had 16 meditators in London, where I live, and we sent an intention to 4 targets in Germany. It was 2 kinds of algae. Scientists like things like algae, a jade plant, and a human being.
Okay.
And we stressed all 4 of them. We made the woman drink 3 cups of coffee. We put a pin through the jade plant, and we poured some vinegar into the algae medium so that they would all be stressed. And the reason we did that is when you're stressed, you send out more of these little light. When I said that everything sends out light, they're called in science biophoton emissions. And when things are stressed, they send out too much light. And so our intention was to actually lower this light slightly. And to the amazement of the physicists who were doing this, we had an effect on all 4 targets.
Huh.
So the question is now, okay, so what if there were 15 of us? Are we going to have a bigger effect if we've got 100,000 of us? This is what we're going to test out. There seems to be some very, very, interesting evidence. You probably have talked about that transcendental meditations, those studies on your show where, when you meditate, a certain percentage of meditators in any city meditate, the crime rate seems to go down.
Right.
But that's people without sending a real intention. They're just meditating. So what happens if we actually send the intention? That's what we want to find out.
You said you were going to create a little world. What actually is it?
It'd be like a terrarium in a sense. And we'll create it with, we'll create a great big terrarium with different plants there and maybe even little living things. But mainly we'll just have the plants, something that we can measure. And we'll have to have 2 of them. We're going to have a control one. And because, with any good scientific study, you've got a control. And you've got the experimental one. And so we're going to have all of our readers at the appointed time all over the world, and we're going to have clocks on our website so everybody knows what the right time is. It's 5 o'clock Greenwich Mean Time, which is, I guess, that would be 9 o'clock in the morning in West Coast, U.S., and I think it's noon time on the East Coast. Everybody's going to send their intention all at the same time, and we'll let everybody know exactly the right words to think, because specificity is really important with intention. And we'll measure it then, and we'll just measure to see what happens.
How are you going to differentiate between the control and the target?
Well, the control will be somewhere hidden away where people won't be able to see it, and the target will be on our website, so people will be able to see it.
So they'll actually, it'll be video, and they can go to the website.
It'll be on a webcam.
Okay.
Yeah, you'll be able to see it. And we'll do that all the time. I mean, if we have a child we're going to send an intention to, you'll see the picture of that child on it. We'll put it on real time on the webcam. So we'll actually see it. And There was one study I wanted to try to do that was really interesting that got carried out in Gary Schwartz's lab at University of Arizona. They had some healers. They took 2 leaves off the same plant, and they measured them so that they were identical in every way, even their biophoton emissions. And they then measured, they then clipped the leaves. They stuck them in 2 pots of plant, pots of dirt. And, of course, this is a cut leaf, so it's going to die soon. And they found that the leaf, they had the control leaf died in about 2 days. And they had healers send an healing intention to the other leaf, and the other leaf lived for 10 days.
Wow.
So that'd be interesting to try. One of the things like that, because we can actually see it. We'll show people the dead leaf, or the life leaf, and just see how long we can keep this leaf alive. So those are some of the questions we're going to start asking.
Let's suppose for a second, Lynn, that you find all of this is real, which is my expectation that you'll verify everything you try. Then what?
Then we start figuring out, okay, how do we use this? Because this is powerful. As I say, there's plenty of evidence about negative intention, some interesting evidence about whether or not to block it. So we have to ask, how do you use this as a force for good? This is why we're trying to do careful philanthropic targets. Mm-hmm. But let's say we find that with our little mini Gaia that it works. Then maybe the next stage is to try a little place. But again, you've got to carefully control this. We could unleash a bomb here, So we have to be very careful about this. But I think our intention here is really to learn, all of us to learn, and then to say, okay, how do we use this in our lives? If this is our new paradigm, if we realize that we are all connected and that we all have an effect all the time on each other, how can we have the best effect? How do we bring this into our lives? How do we have to suddenly start thinking, well, actually, everything I'm thinking is affecting everybody around me. Imagine the thoughts swimming through your heads about your kids. He's such a slob, or he's, pathetic at math. That becomes that kid's intention. That becomes that child.
That's what I'm beginning to believe, yes.
Yeah, so you have to start monitoring yourself a bit more and saying, okay, well, I got to be careful. On the positive side, maybe you as a community can start using your intentions, getting together and start using some positive intentions. And instead of letting all this negative stuff wash all over you all the time that you read in the newspapers, maybe you can all just send some positive intentions to clean up your community, to lower your crime rate. So we're going to ask that too. We may try intentions to lower crime rate in some particular area. That would be a good one too. So do what TM did, the TM people did, but actually send out an intention.
Mm-hmm. How careful were those crime rate studies, and how effective were they?
Okay, there have been some questions about them. I mean, remember they were all published in peer-reviewed journals. That meant some group of people had to study these, and they would have thrown them out if they were bad. So I think that they were reasonably good studies. There continue to be questions about the TM organization because of, the cost of it, et cetera, et cetera. But I think they try to I think they're sincere in their belief and they're sincere in their attempt to quantify what's going on with meditation. So I think they certainly are an interesting marker.
Well, I guess what I'm asking is, what were the published results? It seems like I remember something about Washington, D.C. or some city.
Oh, yeah. Well, there were studies. They showed that when you had, they looked at 48 cities around America, and they found as long as there was a certain percentage of the population meditating, that the crime rate would go down. They did other studies looking at the misery index, that unemployment and things like that. And they found, again, with a certain percentage of meditators, the misery index went down. They also had advanced meditators actually send an intention to hot spots like Israel. And they found that at certain points when they were sending intentions with their meditation, that conflict dropped as well. So there's been enormous numbers of studies done by the TM group about this. But as I say, in the main, they were looking at just what happens when a certain percentage of the population is meditating regularly. These were people who were just meditating. They weren't sending a deliberate intention to change something. Mm-hmm. So my question is to take it one step further and say, okay, what goes on if we really send a deliberate intention to something, and we're all thinking the same thought at the same time? Now, I mean, there have been some studies like that. Studies where they had random event generators going on all the time, like the Global Consciousness Project, where they were trying to measure when lots of people are thinking the same thought at the same time, does it have an effect on these random machines? And they did a whole bunch of studies on this, showing that, like when the O.J. Simpson trial, when every American was on the edge of his or her seat, waiting to find out was O.J. guilty or innocent in his murder trial. At just that point, they found there was an enormous shift on the REG machines running. Or they had them running around the world. They had similar things when the Princess of Wales was killed. There was a big shift.
And of course 9/11.
9/11, the biggest shift of all. So these are again lots of people thinking the same thought, but not making an intention to change. And so my intention experiment is really to start looking at, intention to change and what we can do with it.
All right. Well, what blew me away about the 9/11 measurements at Princeton were that it occurred about 30 minutes before the actual event. And I've been running that through my head. I guess we all know the quantum world defies time as we understand it. How does that settle out with you, the fact that this great spike occurred just before, time-wise, 30 minutes before the actual event?
There's a lot of evidence, Art, that we have an anticipatory effect here. When we're picking up news and bad news, we pick it up early. And they found that with a lot of studies. It's like you hear this signal early. There's no question that there's good evidence for precognition, is what they call it.
Right.
And certainly people were picking this up all over the place. I'm sure you heard about Rupert Sheldrake, who did a study, the British biologist, who did a questionnaire asking anyone to write him in who'd had a dream about 9/11 before it happened. And there were hundreds of people with unbelievably specific dreams about plane crashes into high-rise buildings the night before. And there were lots of things like that. Like a lot of people, there have been some studies showing that when there's a train crash, the numbers are down oftentimes because a lot of people have just had a bad feeling about that train and they've canceled their trip. Even the same thing happened with the Titanic. The numbers were actually down because of that. And
all right, Lynn, hold on. We're pressed by the clock here. We're going to open the phone lines when we come back, judging from the number ringing before we even open them. You have a lot of questions. So, Lynn McTaggart and you next. Indeed, from the high desert. Folks, I'll tell you what. In the field of human study, this is, by any measure, the most interesting science going on right now. It simply washes away, as far as I'm concerned, virtually everything else. It just does not get any better than this. Lynn Taggart and you coming up next. All right, Lynn, we're about to dive into the phones here, and believe me, they're all lit up like a Christmas tree. A lot of people want to talk to you. Your book is The Field, The Quest for the Secret Force of the Universe, and that's exactly what I think it is. Your book is
I was just going to say, Art, I have to just mention, that's my last book. The new book is The Intention Experiment, Using Your Thoughts to Change Your Life and the World. And
that is available...
It's available as of today. It's just launched basically today, and it's available from Simon & Schuster. It's Amazon and all good bookshops, or our website, which is theintentionexperiment.com.
Okay. TheIntentionExperiment.com. Just watch it go. All right. Is there anything that we haven't covered before I get to the phones that we should absolutely cover in this interview?
Well, I guess that I really think that we talked a lot about the past and the influence in the past. I think it's really important to understand that it's not like we can just go back and change the past. But there's certainly evidence that those kinds of things that are, as scientists call them, labile, things that haven't been set in stone yet, we might well be able to influence. And I think that's pretty mind-boggling. The whole idea that, there's time and space are all kind of one big ever-present here and now. Maybe it means that we can send intentions to go back at the moment. Say we haven't really got cancer yet, but maybe we have a little niggling something, some bad cells or whatever. Maybe we can go back to the point where we had perhaps some conflict, some bad moments of our lives, and change our thoughts about that. And maybe that will then ripple through the timeline and affect the disease before it really takes hold. I think those are the kinds of things that are, mind-warping for us with our ideas about separateness and our ideas, the old-fashioned ideas about the way the world works. I think we really have to get into thinking of our lives in a very, very different way.
Well, that's just like doctors talking about preventative medicine, right?
In a sense, but preventative mental medicine.
Oh, exactly. But I mean, the same concept. Catch it early and you've got a better chance.
Yeah. And think nothing is completely set in stone, that things can, that thoughts can go back, and maybe our future is constantly, as they've found, maybe our future is constantly affecting the present. Dean Radin did a very interesting mathematical analysis of those REG machines we were talking about earlier, and he wanted to know how do they work. And he tried three different things. Do they work going forward, as we would normally expect it? Do they work by getting information in the future precognitively, in other words, getting information in the future, or is it that the future affects them backward? And weirdly enough, the thing that mathematically worked the most and the best was the fact that the machines, or our intentions, were working back from the future to affect those machines. Now, go figure that one.
I'm struggling enough with the rest of it. First time caller line, you're on the air with Lynn. Hi.
Oh, hi. Name's Lenny.
Hi there.
I got caught up. Hi, Lynn, and hi, Art.
Hi.
First time caller. So let's see if I can make sense with this. To be clear, it's a hard subject. I believe that through the power of intention, we created this whole mess of humanity. At one time, we were all incredible super beings and decided to experiment and see what it would be like to be the opposite of who we are, the exact opposite. In fact, there's a book called Busting Loose from the Money Game, and he used you, Lynn, in his book. I think hopefully you got some royalties on that. He mentioned your book, The Field, and how we can actually, through the power of intention, change this, get ourselves back to where we originally were by not playing this, what he calls the human game, where we have used the power of intention to basically make us into weak, powerless beings almost. It's like you mentioned on the air yesterday with Dr. Lee, I forgot his last name. He said something about omnipresent, all the omnis, and that's who we are, made in the image and likeness of God, or whatever you want to call it. And we wanted to experiment. Well, what would it be like to be like on a roller coaster ride? Just what would it be like to be in fear and totally experiment with that? And it seems like we pulled it off, and now I think humanity is starting to wake up and reversing it, because we're tired of playing this crazy game. And I know let me give you a chance to answer something. Well, let's say the minute, this is just an offshoot, the minute that movie came out, The Inconvenient Truth, it seemed that's when the global warming really took off. That's when it really became apparent. Did you notice that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It seems like the intention of so many millions of people that saw that movie seemed to create an even more incredible, powerful mindset to bring on even more global warming.
Yeah, exactly. I'm willing to entertain that notion that we are the causative factor in making, whether it's global warming or the war in Iraq or anything else, worse. If you're honest, you've got to entertain the notion.
Yes. Yes. Well, I think that, that definitely can be the case. I think that a lot of minds training on something can then amplify it. I mean, we've certainly seen that with those REG machines. Remember what I was talking about with O.J. Simpson? Lots of people thinking the same thought at the same time, or the 9/11 affected those machines, affected what may be the field or the group mind or something. And so this could be the case. Just attention on something can create a greater effect, which is why we have to be really careful with these intention experiments, that we slowly measure it. But I think, we have to really get behind the idea that we're not separate. That's our real problem. And that's really behind almost every problem we have, is the idea that we are separate. You think wars are created on people feeling they're separate.
That's right.
We're separate, therefore I'm better or I'm different from you. And so if we got the sense that we are all this one big collective and that we have this huge effect on this, every time we think some big mass thought, then we start really changing how we think. And
here's the thing, though, Lynn. Suppose you prove all this. Suppose you get hardcore scientific evidence that we can and indeed are having this effect. At that point, you want to change the world for the better. But I don't know, even with hardcore scientific evidence, how do you change the nightly news? How do you change the way humans communicate with each other and make it more positive? You're talking about changing a world that's pretty set in its ways, Lynn.
It is, but, you could have argued that about 300 or 400 years ago, and you'd see that, we are the same miserable creatures in a lot of ways than we were 400 years ago. But, you change the paradigm, you start changing people and the way they think about each other. And if people really get and take on board that all this violence that they see every night, they're actually taking this into their bodies and it's making them ill, and that they're taking this as their life's intention, and it is affecting everything around them, that every thought they think affects everything around them, they realize that we will start realizing one thing. One, we have to start thinking a bit more positive thoughts because it's having a measurable effect. And two, that maybe all this negativity surrounding us is creating the reality. So, we have to take this on board. First, we have to understand and believe it and prove it, and that's what I'm trying to do. And then it starts changing the way we work. And I think that if you've got overwhelming evidence of this, people start realizing, well, wow, just as when Newton came up with his original ideas, he changed the face of the universe, and he changed the way people conducted their lives because he produced science to prove this. And that's what, I'm hoping to do.
Well, I hope you can do it. And even in the face of overwhelming evidence, I'd be willing to bet it's going to be an uphill battle. Wildcard line, Ronnie in Pennsylvania, you're on with Lynn McTaggart.
Hi, Art. Hi, Lynn.
Hi.
It's a pleasure to be on your show. I'm a long-time listener. I'm a holistic healing nurse, and I have a green aura. I also have a degree in biology, and I've been working on similar subject that you are doing now. I have some experiments that I'm doing, and I will publish pretty soon. Back in the 50s, I have been working on this now since the 70s. And to tell you how negative vibes do work, I had a professor that annoyed me back in the 70s. And my foster daughter and I were both at the same college, and I said to him, "Oh, just go break a leg, will you? Get away from me." The very next day, he had a broken leg.
Well, okay, there you go. That's it's very similar to what you said, and I've had a lot of fast blasts. One young lady, okay, let me read it to you. Donna in Laguna Beach said, "This summer, I gave a former lover another chance to make good," that was in quotes, "for involving me in a love triangle. He reverted right back to his old deceptive ways again, ignoring my rage, in capital letters. This time, within 2 weeks, he suffered a mini stroke."
Yeah. I mean, this is, we can't prove this. We don't have any proof of this, but we certainly have, just as I was talking about having those bad thoughts about my cleaner and having her fall off the bus and break her leg, you have to wonder whether or not you are having this kind of effect. If I don't know about anybody out there, but I'm a terrible gremlin when it comes to computers. When I'm in a bad mood, I break every piece of equipment in my office. I seem to have this very intense force field, and I freeze photocopiers, all of that. And there have been evidence of, Pauli, the great scientist, was like that. He even set things alight. And there's been some evidence there that we're having effect on even inanimate objects all the time. So it must be the case that we're also affecting people with our negative thoughts.
That'd be my bet. Wildcard line, Diana from California, you're on with Lynn.
Hello, I am so happy to be on with both Art and Lynn. Oh, my gosh. So excited. Lynn, I read your book, The Field. Excellent book. Excellent.
Thank you.
And I was kind of laughing about you saying that reality not set in stone. That's pretty much what I would tell my now ex-husband when he couldn't find his keys. And he tried to tell me, I used them to open the door. And I'm going, no, I don't. And you can't tell me I do because, you can't change reality now because it's already set. But a friend of mine does actually work weather, and she also affects machinery. In fact, lately when she goes into the bank or the post office or the DMV lately, the machine and, the monitor in front of the people that she goes up to, it goes blank, and she's like, hope they don't notice it's me. and she really works the weather, too. I don't know if you know about 2 years ago in Indiana where they weren't going to have any snow for Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
And then they ended up with the biggest blizzard they'd had in recorded history.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's quite amazing. There's, it stands to reason that if they show in the laboratory that people can affect bacteria or they can affect, a plant or whatever, that why not affect the weather? It needs a study. Well, of course, there's been this one little study that Roger Nelson did showing around Princeton. There was always sun around graduation day. And he actually did a study comparing the weather in Princeton with surrounding areas on graduation. And he felt it was just the good wishes of everybody hoping for a really nice day around graduation that did it. And there certainly was almost like a mental umbrella that covered Princeton at the time.
Well, how safe would it be if humanity really does discover that even singular intention, a single person, can affect the weather? As an example, it's already chaotic enough, Lynn. Maybe this power should not be in the hands of individuals. That's a little worrisome if indeed individuals have as much power as a million people, which by the way, I doubt.
Well, this is the thing, Art. Probably we already have this power, and we're already using it to a terrible effect. Look what we're doing with the world. Nobody could say that we're doing a very good job here.
I know.
And so maybe the idea is just to get people more aware of it. So in the main, people are good, in the main. And if people understand what they're doing a bit more and maybe monitor it a bit more, maybe we'll have a better effect.
Maybe. East of the Rockies, David, in Wisconsin, you're on with Lynn.
Hello, Art. First, I missed the show recently. I wasn't sure what happened. You and Aaron moved back to America, I assume, if that's the case. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Other than that, my name is David, Minnesota, Wisconsin area of America. Within the last year, I've read a couple books, a couple authors, Deepak Chopra, Eckhart Tolle, and I've become what you would call awakened or enlightened spiritually. Well, I've let go of the illusion of time. Now is the only moment. The past, anything you did in the past, it wasn't the past, it was now. Anything that you're going to do in the future, it's not the future, it's now. The past is only a thought or a memory, and the future is only an anticipation. I wanted to get her thoughts on that. I know that we are all beings of pure light and that we all do emanate this field of intentions that creates humanity and the way that humanity is in our daily lives and everything like that. And like I said, I usually meditate myself a few hours each day, and the sky is bluer, the grass is greener, trees are just beautiful, and I can't explain it, but I know what I've experienced. And so I wanted to get her thoughts on what I am doing. What I've been focusing on is sending my energy to all of humanity to sort of bring about a global conscious awakening, which I feel is inevitable. I wanted to see if Lynn was at all spiritual. I know she's a scientific writer, but is she at all spiritual? Does she meditate at all? Or what are her thoughts about a global conscious awakening and conscious in general?
All right, David, pause and let's see what she has to say.
Okay, there is no doubt that this work has completely changed my life. I mean, when I started researching the field, which was many years ago, I didn't know what I was going to find, and what I did find changed completely propelled me in a new direction, and it had to have had a spiritual effect on me. It had a deeply. I think I was always a seeker and a spiritual person, but it gave me a framework that sat very easily with me in terms of spirituality. And yes, I meditate, and I am now what I say. A lot of people look to me now as some sort of spiritual leader, and I remind them that I am just the communicator. I'm just trying to get this information and synthesize it for people, but I'm learning with them. I mean, if we're going to paradigm shift, we're all stuck in our old views of being separate, our Newtonian views of separateness. And so this is a pretty profound change we all have to go through. And so I'm learning with everybody else.
You're going to have to be very careful, Lynn, or you're going to be the leader of a new religion. All right, hold tight. We're here at the bottom of the hour. Lynn McTaggart is my guest. You might want to check out her website, theintentionexperiment.com. From the high desert, the great American Southwest, yes, back in the good old USA. I'm Art Bell, and we will be right back. Yes, here I am. I believe that Lynn McTaggart or somebody else is going to get absolute concrete evidence that all of this is absolutely real. I believe that in my heart, in my head, I just absolutely believe it. From the experiments I ran to what I've read to all the guests I've talked to, including Lynn. And so all of this is real. But when we finally get the concrete evidence of it, trying to get the world to accept it and change the way the world, meaning all the people in it, operate in order to make a better world, now that's going to be a trick. In a moment, Lynn will be right back with all of you. All right, once again, here comes Lynn, and here comes a caller for you, Lynn. Doug in Davenport, Iowa. You're on with Lynn McTaggart.
Hello, and Art, I tell you what, I've been listening to you for 9 years, and I've never gotten in before, and boy, if there was one night I'd like to, this would be it.
Well, here you are.
Great.
Well, Lynn, my question for you is, have you ever heard of, or are you familiar with, what's referred to as the direct sea, the negative energy sea?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's it's another word for the zero-point field.
Yeah, and that's what I was wondering about, because that really, from what I understand of it, would very easily provide a mechanism that would account for all of the qualities you absolutely fascinating. But the direct C, as I understand it, came from Paul Dirac's original formalization of the electron equation, but that was later changed. In the original formalization, it included both positive energy positrons and electrons and negative energy positrons and electrons. But basically, the physics community of the time didn't like the implications of that, because what they found is, just like in an electron orbital, all the lowest energy states have to be filled before you can have higher energy states. Well, in order for us to have electrons in our universe, because everything we have is positive energy electrons and positrons, all the lower, essentially what you'd have to have is an infinite sea of negative energy positrons and electrons, and all of those states would have to be filled. So basically, our universe essentially floats on this sea of negative energy. Mm-hmm. But what ends up happening with that is you end up with what's called a Bose-Einstein condensate, and what that basically amounts to is you end up with all of these essentially infinite number of particles that are all described by a single wave function. In other words, you get it's a single entity, and anything that happens, anytime anything drops into that entity, it's essentially spread throughout the entire universe simultaneously, everywhere, throughout all space and time. Mm-hmm. And what I'm wondering is, if you know anything about, if you've looked into that, is in terms of how that might account for the various effects that you've seen and that have been seen from all these experiments.
Okay, well, actually, I do cover it in my book, because it's funny that you mention it, because what a lot of scientists have discovered, like Fritz Albert Popp, is that this thing you're talking about, this Bose-Einstein condensate, which is another word for coherence. You think of it like a light bulb. Normally, a light bulb sends out constructive and destructive waves, and they cancel each other out, and so you only get, with a 60-watt light bulb, just a little bit of light. But if that was a Bose-Einstein condensate, you would have light that was hundreds of thousands of times brighter than the surface of the sun. I mean, it's that powerful. And they're finding that this kind of very coherent light is coming out of living things like human beings. So just as you say, the view is that this is what is caused by, this is what a thought is. It's a very organized bit of light that's sent out by humans and can affect all time and space. And so if we're sending out this very coherent light, then we have an amazing effect everywhere, all the time.
All right. First-time caller line, Donna in Washington. Your turn with Lynn.
Oh, thank you, Art. I'm really happy to talk to both you and Lynn. Thanks for taking my call. Mm-hmm. I want to just kind of talk to Lynn like we're sisters at the kitchen table, because I have a big emotional question. I have 2 kids, and they are raised in a very intentional home, very loving home. Both my kids are Reiki practitioners. My 14-year-old son was actually a Reiki master, as is my husband, and a very intentional, loving family. Maybe not the most red collar that you're talking to tonight, but I would think the most intentional color that you're talking to tonight, one of them. Uh-huh. And my 14-year-old son died of leukemia in May. Now, I know a lot of healers, a lot of prayer warriors, including my 14-year-old son, who was the best healer I know. And I wonder how a person reconciles that kind of implication. Do you see that there's something greater than the individual's power of intention? Do you guilt? Is there a guilt associated for you personally if something doesn't go the way that your powerful intention directs it?
Okay. I mean, one thing we have to remember is get behind this idea. First of all, I'm really sorry to hear about your son. That is That is really painful. And it's also, the first thing to say is it was not his fault. It wasn't that he was thinking the wrong thoughts or anything like that. But I think the thing that we really have to get behind is the idea that we are not individuals with this absolute mastery. And this is why it takes so much more study and understanding to get our heads around it. If we are all one, then there's lots of things impacting on us all the time, and that there is something greater. There is a greater, call it the field, call it grace, call it God, whatever you want to call it, is the ultimate energy field that we are swimming as part of, and that we are not an individual with an absolute power that's going to affect everything all the time, and that our say doesn't always hold sway. So we have to look at it in light of that greater whole all the time. And also, if I were going to put my what doctors don't tell you hat on for a while, I would say, well, okay, with kids with leukemia, there are a lot of environmental effects that we're all buried under now, whether it's electromagnetics, cell phones, all those sorts of things are just, we're swimming in, all sorts of toxic things. And so all of these things also have an effect, a physical effect on us. So it's not just that, it's not that your son was thinking the wrong thoughts or that you could have saved them. There may also be a bigger plan for him in this greater universe. And that I say one other thing that is really important, that's just a tangential element, but is very much the case in the field, and evidence that I've found is there's very strong evidence that consciousness is something outside of the confines of our bodies. It's not locked up in our brains, and it also doesn't die. I mean, you see that with so many studies, good studies of near-death experiences. You find that people who were, these were people with their computer unplugged, so to speak, and they had complete awareness of everything going on in the world. So your son has just moved to someplace else, but I don't believe consciousness dies. There's too much evidence otherwise.
Okay. Wildcard line, Tonya, in Ohio. You're on the air with Lynn.
Hello, Lynn and Art. I've been very much enjoying listening to you. And
Good.
What I wanted to ask about was, earlier in the show, Art made a comment about the polar bears dying left and right, and you may be familiar with what George Norrie accomplished with everyone who was listening to him healing Barbaro, the racehorse.
Mm-hmm. I didn't hear that, but that's interesting.
Okay. Well, George Norrie mentions it from time to time because one night when it looked like the horse was going to be put down, he asked that everyone give their intention that the best outcome happened, and it did because he dramatically improved overnight. And so concerning the polar bears, I feel very close to animals, and sometimes it almost makes me cry to hear about what they're going through. I've heard that they've resorted to cannibalism because of the conditions. Mm-hmm. And what I wanted to ask was that everyone just has the pure intention right now to help in some miraculous way to help save these beautiful, noble, loving animals in some way, just to help save them from the suffering they're going through.
Okay, ma'am. Well, here's the thing. The polar bears are dying because they don't have ice to climb onto. That's their normal habitat. Their normal habitat is going away because of global warming. There's no doubt about it. I mean, the North Pole is virtually melting, and so the problem, it's a symptom of the big problem, which is we've got a melting ice cap. Now, if we're going to direct intent, I suppose it would have to be toward that, but I'm not going to instruct people. That's my problem, Lynn. I understand this works, and I don't want to toy with it until I do understand it.
I think that's what we're trying to do with the intention experiment, is to push, as I say, to find out about it. We all need to learn here. There's so much to learn, and it can be scary in the wrong hands. So as you say, it's probably not a good idea to just send our ideas willy-nilly out there on the planet. But we can start in small ways, personally. And that's why, I have a program I've tried to find from the science, what are the ways that make intention work best, so I can help people try it in their lives. I mean, one of the things I suggest for people to do is to try little experiments. For instance, if your husband never brings you flowers, never brings you flowers, then start sending an intention to do that. I had a reader who actually did that. She was at a workshop with me, and her husband never brought her flowers. She sent an intention. She got home, opened up the door, and there was a big bouquet of flowers he was holding as he opened the door. So try those little things. Your kids never make their bed. Start sending intentions. See what happens on that little front.
Instead of yelling.
Send an intention.
Okay, first-time caller line, Seth in Sacramento. You're on with Lynn McTaggart.
Art and Lynn, it's a pleasure to speak with you both.
Thank you.
My name is Seth Inway, and what interests me is the notion that this kind of thing is possible. Of course, this is intriguing to many of us who want to affect our world for the better. But my question is this: if this is possible, and indeed it is, based on the evidence that has been researched and evidenced, is God the one who is the usurper of all these powers? And of course, in my view, he is, the one who created all things. Are we those who should use this kind of power, or should we completely rely on him for those things that change our world and indeed ourselves?
All right. Well, that's a hot potato, all right. Lynn?
I think that there is, I have a way to walk between this, Art, which is every single intention master I talk to put out an intention. And these are some of them very deeply spiritual and religious people. They put out their intention. They believed that was an important thing to do, but they also then surrendered to the higher force. You move out of the way. You get your ego out of the way. And that was, you kind of, in a sense, move aside, as I call it. And that means that maybe the propeller of this is the greater force. But that I suppose we were given this intention in order to use it.
There you go. I suppose if it were not for us to use, we would not be able to. Wildcard line, Eddie in Dallas, Texas. You're on the air with Lynn.
Hello, Art. Hello, Lynn.
Hi.
Art, I know you won't do this, so I am directing this to Lynn.
Okay.
But I would like to volunteer to be a human target to make me stop smoking with no withdrawals.
That's fabulous. If you'd like to log on and just log on to our website, theintentionexperiment.com, and just contact us and let us know that, we'll put you onto one of our experiments. We'll see if we can do that. And of course, our community, we've got a community too that's growing and has groups, and we could try that in a small way.
Mm-hmm. Okay, there you go. If I was going to do it, I would have aimed the power at myself, because that is my current struggle. Anthony in Joplin, Missouri, you're on with Lynn McTaggart.
Yes, our complete honor to speak with you. We were in a physiological psychology class I had in college, which is like an overview of the brain and the nervous system. The instructor, we were talking about either the amygdala or glucocorticoids, and he brought up that there was a part of the brain, and I don't recall what it is, and I'm hoping Lynn knows, that he claimed that scientists were working on figuring out how to turn it on, because it could cure our bodies of anything. But like I said, I don't remember what he was talking about. And I also want to know if she felt like with the conflicting religions, if that was like incompatible computer programs, which is bound to create conflict. And I'll listen off the air. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that interesting double question. Yes, on the prayer studies, I think one of the problems were that there was an incompatibility between the belief of the recipients and the prayers. I mean, in one study, they used people from religions all around the world, and then they used people who were, part of the Bible Belt as the recipients. And I think that probably there has to be this compatibility between the religions. In terms of the brain, I have no idea what he was talking about. If we can turn this on, it's going to cure everything.
Yeah, he was asking about a specific part of the brain.
I don't know what he was talking about, but I do know that there's a lot of studies showing, some of the studies recounted in the intention experiment, show that this amygdala, which is kind of like the emotional center of the body, they find that things like meditation, so powering up this centering thing that we use for intention, actually enlarges the structure of the brain and allows a greater connection between the intuitive part of the brain, the gut hunch part, and the cognitive part, the forebrain, the part that is all the sort of seat of reasoning. Mm-hmm. So what we're talking about is that intention and using intention actually changes the structure of your brain and turns you basically into a bigger and better radio. You're a better transmitter and receiver.
Okay. Well, I'm all for that. Listen, we're coming toward the end of our time, Lynn. We're almost out of time. And is there a way on the website? I've got a full board of people who still want to talk to you here. Is there a way that people can connect with you, email, whatever?
Yes. If you go to our website, both of our websites, either theintentionexperiment.com is our best one, or livingthefield.com. You can contact us. You can put down your intention diaries, what's happening with you using intention. You can be part of our community, which is people talking to each other and telling them about their experiences, part of our groups. You can let us know what you want to do. You can log in and register in order to be part of the experiment. We've got 75 days, 7 hours, and 3 minutes and 36 seconds to our next experiment. So you can just log on and you can get our information. You'll be getting constant information about what's going on with our experiments. So just contact us.
All right. You have been a fabulous guest on a fabulous topic. Lynn, thank you for being here, and you have a wonderful night.
Thank you. You too, Art. It's been a real pleasure.
Okay. Take care, everybody. That's it from the high desert. The voice you hear is that of Crystal Gale, and I guess I'll see you next weekend. Good.